They signed leases. They paid rent. They lived in the apartments for months. Then they moved into the space between the floors. Arthur Dunn died in his sleep on November 14, 1958. He was 62 years old. A quiet accountant for the Transport Authority, he had managed the brownstone at 412 Oakwood Boulevard for 2 decades. The tenants in 4B described him as gentle. He remembered birthdays. He kept the radiator valves oiled. He was the kind of man who disappears from history the moment his heart stops. The discovery began 3 days after his removal. The new building superintendent, a man named Frank Kowalski, received a damage claim from the tenant in 3B. A water stain had appeared on the ceiling, spreading outward like a bruise. The source was Dunn's apartment directly above. Kowalski entered Unit 4B with a master key at 9 a.m. on November 17th to inspect the plumbing. The bathroom fixtures were dry. The kitchen pipes were sound. Kowalski traced the moisture to the back of the walk-in closet in the master bedroom. The plaster there was soft to the touch, weeping condensation. He used a claw hammer to open the wall, expecting to find a leaking stack pipe. Instead, he found a draft of cold air that smelled of lye and dry earth. The hole revealed a crawl space that wasn't on the blueprints. It ran the entire length of the building, sandwiched between the 4th floor floorboards and the 3rd floor ceiling. A hidden corridor 3 feet high and 40 feet long. Kowalski shined his flashlight into the darkness. He saw a row of shapes wrapped in oilcloth, arranged with geometric precision. Police arrived at 10:15 a.m. Detectives removed the closet wall to access the cavity. The space was dry, ventilated by a modified chimney flue that bypassed the furnace. The shapes were bodies, adult human remains, preserved through a combination of chemical desiccation and the building's natural airflow. There were 11 of them. The coroner noted the preservation was amateur but effective. The bodies were fully clothed in the fashion of their respective eras. The earliest subject wore a suit dated to the mid-1930s. The most recent wore a floral house dress purchased in 1956. They were laid out shoulder to shoulder facing the wall. Each body was positioned identically. They were curled on their sides in a fetal tuck. Their knees were drawn to their chests. Their arms were crossed tight against their heads. Their hands were pressed firmly over their ears. It was a pose of refusal, a pose of someone trying to block out a sound they couldn't bear to hear. The true anomaly was found during the initial on-site examination. The mouth of the first subject, a male in his 40s, was distended. Rigor and desiccation had locked the jaw open. The oral cavity was packed tight with crumpled paper. It wasn't random debris, it was deliberate. Forensics extracted the wadding with tweezers. The paper was yellowed, brittle parchment. It was a page torn from a legal transcript, specifically a court record from 1935. As they processed the other 10 bodies the pattern held, every single subject had their mouth stuffed with specific pages from the same trial. The case referenced on the pages was State versus Leland, a homicide trial from October 1935. A man named Thomas Leland had been accused of the drunken shooting of a young grocery clerk. The clerk was Arthur Dunn's younger brother. The trial had been a sensation in the local papers. The defense had argued self-defense. The jury acquitted Leland on November 2, 1935. he walked free. Arthur Dunn, then 39, had sat in the gallery every day, silent. The court records showed he made no outburst when the verdict was read. He simply stood up, collected his hat, and walked out. Investigators began identifying the bodies in the crawlspace. They weren't random drifters. They were tenants who had lived in the building over the last 23 years. People who had moved in, lived for a few months or years, and then ostensibly moved out, forwarding addresses that led nowhere. Relatives told they had left for jobs in the West. The first subject identified was deeply connected to the 1935 trial. He was the son of the jury foreman. He had moved into apartment 2C in 1936. He vanished in 1937. The second subject was the wife of juror number 4. She vanished in 1940. The pattern was absolute. Every body in that wall belonged to a direct relative of the 12 jurors who had acquitted his brother's killer. Dunn hadn't targeted the jurors themselves. He had targeted their kin. He brought them into his building, rented them apartments, fixed their sinks, and waited. And toxicological analysis of the hair samples revealed the method. It wasn't violence, it was chemistry. High concentrations of chloral hydrate were found in the root shafts. Dunn had likely spiked their water or offered them tonics for health. He was the building manager. He had keys. He had trust. The physical evidence suggested they died peacefully. There were no ligature marks, no defensive wounds. They simply went to sleep. But the post-mortem treatment was the punishment. The hands over the ears. The transcript pages in the mouths. He was making them listen to the lies that had freed a killer and silencing their ability to object. The pages found in the mouths were not random. They were the closing arguments of the defense attorney. The specific paragraphs where the lawyer justified the shooting of Dunn's brother. Dunn had forced the families of the jury to consume those words, to hold them in their throats for eternity. The timeline was staggering. He had taken one victim every 2 years on average. He lived with them. The tenants in 4B had complained of smells for decades. Records showed Dunn filed reports blaming the sewer line, the rats, the humidity. He placated them while they slept inches above the dead. The logistics of the crawl space required constant maintenance. A supply of lime was found in the basement storage locker assigned to Dunn. Receipts from a hardware store in 1945 showed bulk purchases of insecticide and heavy-duty canvas. He maintained the tomb as meticulously as he maintained the building's books. But the count was wrong. There were 12 jurors in 1935. There were only 11 bodies in the wall. The investigators cross-referenced the jury list with the tenant history of 412 Oakwood. They found the gap. Juror number 12. They returned to the crawl space. They measured the distance between the bodies. They found a gap at the far end of the row, closest to the master bedroom. A space of clear floorboards, 6 feet long. It had been swept clean. Above the empty space, nailed to the wooden stud of the wall, was a small brass plate. It was a name tag, similar to the ones Dunn used on the mailboxes in the lobby. It was already engraved. It read, Patricia Hayes. Patricia Hayes was not missing. She was the tenant in apartment 5A. She was 42 years old, a librarian who had lived in the building for 3 months. She was the daughter of the judge who had presided over the 1935 trial. When police interviewed her, she expressed shock. She described Mr. Dunn as a lovely old man who had given her a discount on the rent because he knew her father. She mentioned he often brought her tea in the evenings to help her settle in. A search of Dunn's kitchen revealed a tin of loose-leaf tea on the counter. The lab analysis confirmed it was laced with arsenic. The dose was small, cumulative. He wasn't putting her to sleep like the others. He was poisoning her slowly. The crawlspace evidence indicated the 12th spot was ready. A roll of oilcloth was found folded nearby. A stack of transcript pages was sitting on a beam, weighed down by a stone. These pages were different. They were the judge's instructions to the jury. Dunn had died before he could collect the final debt. Patricia Hayes had been ingesting the poison for weeks. Medical exams showed she had significant liver damage but would recover. She had been living directly above the grave prepared for her. The scale of the deception was total. Dunn had operated a slaughterhouse in a residential building for 23 years. He had recruited his victims through newspaper ads, offering low rent to specific surnames, waiting for the bait to be taken. The ventilation system he built to mask the smell was ingenious. A series of baffles and charcoal filters installed in the chimney flue. It drew the air from the crawl space and vented it above the roof line. The bad pipes excuse was a cover for the few days when the wind blew the wrong way. No confession was found, no diary explaining his grief. The only communication Arthur Dunn left for the world was the arrangement of the bodies, the hands, the ears, the paper in the throats, a silent diorama of a trial that never ended in his mind. The crawl space was cleared on November 20th. The bodies were removed in canvas bags. The building was evacuated and condemned by the city the following week. It stood empty for 2 years, a brick monument to a vendetta that required a generation to execute. The building was demolished in 1960. The site is now a parking lot for a grocery store. The pavement covers the soil where 11 people were held in suspended animation, curled around the words that killed them. But the inventory of the crawl space revealed one final item. Tucked into the corner behind the 11th body was a small wooden box. Inside was a single bullet casing. Ballistics matched it to the gun used in the 1935 shooting. Dunn had kept the casing that killed his brother. He had placed it there as the cornerstone of his collection, the seed from which the garden grew. The 11 victims were returned to their families for burial. The identifications were difficult. Dental records were scarce. In some cases, the only way to identify them was by the tenant lease agreements Dunn had kept in his filing cabinet, marked with a red check mark. Patricia Hayes moved to Ohio. She never spoke publicly about the tea, or the name tag, or the man who remembered her birthday. She died in 1994. The legal system in 1935 had declared Thomas Leland not guilty. Arthur Dunn had spent the rest of his life overturning that verdict, juror by juror. He didn't file an appeal. He built one. The transcript pages found in the mouths were reassembled by forensic archivists. They formed a complete record of the defense's closing statement. But one page was missing from every single mouth. Page 42. The page where the verdict was read. Dunn had burned it. Ashes found in a metal coffee can in the crawl space confirmed it. In his court, The verdict was never read. The trial never ended. The bodies remained in the morgue for months. The state struggled to issue death certificates. Technically, these people had been missing for decades. Legally, they had no status. The final count confirmed the debt was almost paid. 11 relatives, 1 judge's daughter. A perfect circle of retribution, broken only by a failing heart in apartment 4B. Arthur Dunn was buried in a potter's field. No one claimed his body. His estate, consisting entirely of the building and its contents, was seized by the city. The case of the crawlspace at 412 Oakwood remains a forensic oddity, a massacre conducted in total silence, unnoticed by the city that surrounded it. The parking lot on Oakwood Boulevard is quiet at night. There is no plaque, no marker, just asphalt over the place where a jury's families finally rested, hands pressed to their ears, refusing to hear the verdict.